any day. It's a real pleasure to have Bill back. As many of you do know, he's a dentist that practices in Shelby, North Carolina, but really has outstanding credentials like our other speakers. Bill went to the University of North Carolina undergraduate as well as for dental school. And he did a residency at Medical University of South Carolina, and Bill currently still holds an adjunct professor appointment at UNC. And has a really great background for what he's going to talk about. He's going to talk about updates on opioids and marijuana in the clinic, but he's been on the Wellbeing Advisory Committee for the American Dental Association, and you can read additional details. And I'm going to ask Bill to share some other things about his background, because I won't do it justice, but we're really excited to have Dr. Claytor with us, longtime friend, and he's been a regular contributor on the national front. He's not going to tell you that, but we'll brag on him in that regard. So if you guys help join me in welcoming Dr. Bill Claytor.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks for the invitation, Corey, and appreciate all the hospitality. Yes, let me give you kind of a little bit of an update just briefly. I'm the executive director of the North Carolina Caring Dental Professionals. And we help to monitor and advocate those who are dentists and dental hygienists who are dealing with substance abuse, burnout, in dentistry, a lot of perfectionism, believe it or not, and issues like that. I am really, I've been doing opioid lectures since about 2017 for the dentists in the state and around the country too. And we really talk about these topics, you know, like opioids and marijuana and all the things that we're seeing clinically in our practices. I do like, if I can refer to Dr. Harrison's comments he made about hope. I was talking to a dentist in Los Angeles last Saturday, and he was getting a doctorate degree in burnout. I didn't know there was such a thing, but at the university there, he's been working with Christina Maslach and Dr. Leiter, Michael Leiter, and everything. And he was saying, you know, the thing that gives me the ability to go on in life is to have a hope. And he told me about his faith, his Christian faith. I said, you know, that's really so key, really. It really is, because if you come from an aspect of that, you know, God's with you, and He's in you, and He can use you, and you have opportunities in life, it's a whole different perspective from flipping the coin and saying, why am I here? Who am I? What do I do next to get what I need? And so it's really a blessing, and I just, I'll talk more about that towards the end of my talk. A lot of what you're going to hear today, Dr. Harrison touched on a little bit. I'm going to kind of talk on it also, but kind of go around some of the issues. I'll talk some about what's going on with the, you know, obviously opioids well, let me try that again. Opioids and cannabis, and then some closing thoughts. I will say that the opioid epidemic is as you know, it's not. I get questions all the time from dentists because, you know, it's a mandatory thing that you have to take a 1-hour CE course, and they're saying, you know, we're not the problem. We don't have the problem. It's the physicians who prescribe all these opioids. And I'm going like, yes and no. And so I try to pinpoint areas that we can improve, and I'm going to talk about that as dentists. But just so we all are on the same page, you mentioned opiates. We're talking about the natural opioids, basically from the poppy plant, the morphine and codeine derivatives there, and then the semi-synthetics, oxycodone, hydrocodone, and then the synthetic opioids, which are really the issues now. Fentanyl, over close to 100 analogs. The thing about the fentanyl analogs that are killing Americans in just wild numbers, as you know, and is that the analogs a lot of times are cheaper to make and they're more potent than some of the earlier fentanyl formulations. And so you're getting this, you know, the impurities, the mixing of multiple drugs, polypharmacy into these areas. We see in autopsy reports about 30% of people who have overdosed on opioids are also usually have an associated benzo in the bloodstream. So it's, you know, none of it's pure, as you know. There's not like he died of heroin, he died of one drug. It's usually a multitude of things. But just to refresh our memory, the United States represents about 5% of the world's population, but we consume almost 80% of the world's opioids. Now, I don't know, but I mean, there's places in the world that are, you know, third, fourth world countries. How do people deal with pain there? How do they deal with, you know, anything? And we have everything at our fingertips. I mean, the phone, or you can, you know, I can order anything I want in 5 minutes and have somebody drive it here. But there are people that are suffering pain and depression and illness. How do they deal with it? So my question is, do Americans really have 80% of the world's pain problems? Obviously, opioids are used, you know, for different reasons, but 80% of the problem. So, you know, I've lost recently a couple of good acquaintances. A friend, one was a real good friend, and one was an acquaintance, to fentanyl overdose. And it's been quite tragic, as you can imagine, for the families. But the gentleman that I'm going to refer to, he doesn't, I mean, I'm going to mention his name. He's Austin Eubanks. And Austin was a guy that in 1999, I believe it was in April, he was at Columbine High School. And the shooters came in, and he was shot in the hand and the knee. He collapsed on top of his friend who had been killed. He was laying there in full blood, and he collapsed. And when he tried to get up, they were yelling, "Get down, get down!" The shooters are coming back in. So he laid on top of his best buddy. They used to be fishing buddies. He'd lay there and just, you know, not move, and hoping that the people with the guns would come back through and not shoot him. Well, they did. They walked through, but they didn't shoot him because they thought he was dead. So after the shooting takes place and all the things settle down, the ER, the EMTs, the ambulance, police, everybody was there, and they had him out in the back of an ambulance, if you will, or, you know, a truck, and they were saying, "Are you in pain?" And he said, "You know, not really. I mean, I have pain, but," he says, "Are you in pain? We'll give you something for pain." He says, "My pain's in here. It's not in my body. It's in here." And so they took him to the hospital, and you know the story. They gave him opioids, and then he started getting his own opioids and became a heroin addict. And for a number of years, 10 or 12 years, he lived on the streets, did everything. And then finally got clean and really got back into community recovery, and spent many times out in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We created a treatment center out there. And we used to have him come to our meetings and talk to us about his experience. And he said something to me one time that really was important. And so I want to equate this story with why Americans take 80% of the world's opioids. He said to me, he said, "You know, Bill, some people have to take opioids to avoid going into withdrawal. Those who tried or got addicted, now they have to do something to deal with it." But he said, "For me, opioids really didn't help with the pain, but it helped with the depression." He said, "Opioids are great antidepressants." And I'm just wondering, you know, obviously we've got people who take opioids on the street that have to take it, or else they go into withdrawal if they can't get treatment. Or we have people who, you know, use it for other reasons. And maybe, I don't know, your physician, is it a great antidepressant? He described it as being an optometrist and just looking through a mirror, and he said his life just came into focus when he took it. You know, that kind of everything was normal. And so, I don't know, are we taking it for pain? Are we taking it for depression? We get addicted? You know, how do we deal with it? But I just want to, you know, bring to mind that 5% of the world's population that we represent, but we take 80% of the opioids. In fact, in the United States, we take 99.7% of the hydrocodone in the world, 60% of the Dilaudid, and 81% of the Percocet. Now, if you remember back in the late 70s, early 80s, when this wonder drug called Vicodin came out, Bandcap A-C, Vicodin, all these different drugs, Vicodin marketed that as VI, 6 times stronger than codeine. Well, in dental school, you know, we had Tylenol here, and we had Percocet up here, but we didn't have anything in the middle, and that Vicodin kind of fit that. You were shaking your head.
I'm just saying, yeah, I mean, I was trained in the 70s and early 80s and been through all these different waves of how we look at opioids. And as an internist dealing with all kinds of alcohol and opioid related disease coming into our emergency rooms in San Francisco. And yeah, I mean, I've wavered all over the way, you know, but so if I can, I mean, I've treated lots of people who were going through withdrawals.
Yeah, yeah. My daughter was a resident in San Francisco a few years ago, and she tells stories.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have stories.
Yeah. But in other words, we consume a lot of the opioids, and you know the thing that's real popular now is this rainbow fentanyl. There was a big scare around Halloween that the kids would get hold of it. I don't know of any episodes where people actually died from trick or treating, you know, going around and stuff. But I mean, to me, that looks like the sweet tart I grew up with, right? You remember those? But this is what we're seeing on the streets, and so along Dr. Harrison's line, within 2 or 3 minutes, briefly kind of touch on some of the things he was talking about. But we have a long history of opioid use in America. As mentioned before, it actually started before the Civil War, and then morphine became commonly used. The Bayer Company in 1898 developed this one drug called heroin, and I think Bayer's up in New Haven, Connecticut, if I'm not mistaken. Then he talked about the Narcotics Act, the Harrison Narcotics Act. I used to think that was President Harrison. President Harrison was in 1840, so this was a congressman from New York that proposed this marketing proposal about how to regulate it. Then we had the Heroin Act of 1924, and then during World War II and afterwards into the 60s, some of the anesthesiologists were opening up what they call pain clinics to do nerve blocks. And they thought that they could do nerve blocks if they could reduce the amount of surgeries and the need for opioids. In the late 70s and 80s, and this is where we were just talking, the sort of what I call the first wave or the first phase of the current opioid epidemic. Percocet and Vicodin appeared on the market. We had the Dr. Jick article, the development of addiction is rare in patients with no history of addiction. In fact, the mantra was less than 1%. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you were trained during that time heard that. And then Dr. Portnoy talked about it was safe, it was a humane way, and an alternative to surgery. Pain is a fifth vital sign. Interestingly enough, that same year was when OxyContin was birthed, and Dr. Sackler, his billion-dollar empire, took off from there. The pain as a fifth vital sign. American Pain Society in 1996 adopted that. And somewhere in the mid-early 2010s, 15, 16, somewhere in there, the AMA, the American Pain Society, along with a plethora of other organizations said, this is really has become one of the small motivating factors or things that kept the opioid crisis going on. So they kind of withdrew their support for that pain as a fifth vital sign. But we still talk about it, and you still see these, these charts in doctors' offices. Now, medical and dental schools are focusing more not on the number, but on functionality and also lifestyle quality and things like that. So, talking about pain is part of the process of treatment, not just, and now you have pain, what do you do now? So it's looked at more as far as talking about it up front. Dentists are notoriously bad for telling their patients what to expect after surgery. Physicians do quite a good job. I mean, when I had my cataracts done, it was just like, I got to memorize this stuff. There was so much to memorize, but I appreciate it because I knew what to expect. And that's part of the healing process. That's part of the treatment process. That's part of the pain process. And that's why I say to the dentist, have that conversation. In the 50s and 60s, we did ourselves no favor by having these signs out that said painless dentists. You remember those? Norman Rockwell had the little, I think it was Norman Rockwell, had the little boy with the dog, and he had his head wrapped in a towel. He's looking up and it says painless dentist. A little, flyer shingle hanging out, and he's writing on the side of the building, liar. I mean, you need to tell patients, you're manipulating periosity, your tissue, the body's got any part. I mean, you're going to have a pain level of 2 or 3. I mean, can we deal with that?
Isn't that why most people go to the dentist, though?
Do what now?
That's why most people go to the dentist.
Because of
Pain.
pain. No, absolutely. Yeah. And we don't talk about it. We, as I use the old story. Right. At Chapel Hill when I was there, I mean, it was like, we gloved up, we numbed up, we took the tooth out, and we wrote a prescription, and we became what I call an RD, a real doctor, because we could write prescriptions. And we were writing opioids. It was always Tylenol number 3, Tylenol number 3, Tylenol number 3. Tylenol, you know, it just went on and on and on. Then a few Percocets came in, and we came out, and that's the way we were trained. I mean, it was just like what you did. No one knew why, but we did it. Obviously, if we know what we know now, we wouldn't have been prescribing so many. But you're right, that's why people go to the dentist, because of the pain. And then going on, you may have remembered back in the late 90s, Purdue Pharma made this video with about 4 or 5 patients about how I got my life back, how opioids helped them to function and have a normal lifestyle. Sales skyrocketed, and the Joint Commission co-sponsored a little pamphlet or whatever, a book, I guess it was. It says there's no evidence that addiction is a significant issue when persons are given opioids for pain control. And then as the waves of the opioid prescription epidemics continued on, in 2010, there were these things called From Pills to Heroin, these campaigns. You got to be careful when you start taking pills, you're going to start doing heroin because it leads you down that road. And as Dr. Harrison said, the 3 waves of the opioid epidemic: prescriptions, 1999, 2010, heroin, and the rise of fentanyl on a trajectory that continues to go up today. Also, these are adjusted rates of drug overdose. In 2020, as you see, the blue states there represent states where there has been an increase in the overdose death rate. Obviously, in the West, there's not as many. There's a few states in New England. I always get the question when I do my lectures: why did the opioid epidemic really hit Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania? Why there? And as you know, history going back to 100 years, American Industrial Revolution, whatever. Through history, we've had a lot of industries crop up or start up in these areas, such as coal and steel and automotive and electronic. There's so many industries in this mid-Ohio, this Ohio Valley Northeast that kind of started 100 years ago. So the people were at the factories and they worked. They had a sprained ankle or backache, they went to the doctor. If they had a toothache, they went to the dentist. And commonly they were given opioids. So they were given opioids. As they used the opioids, when the epidemic started, it started decreasing the amount of prescriptions written. In 2014, there were 250 million opioid prescriptions written. By 2019, it was down to 150 million. So we saw almost 100 million prescriptions nationally decrease during that time. So they were, on pain medicine, and they had to find ways to get their pain relief. So commonly, people would go to the streets, they would go to the cartels, they would go to the internet. Everybody wants to think that's where most of the people get the drugs. But as we know, studies have shown that 2/3 of the drugs that people get and they use illegally, in other words, not written for them, come from friends and family. And so that's why, I always say when we run out of friends and family, they're going to come back to us and start asking for pain medicines again. In dentistry, on October 6, 2014, when hydrocodone went from a 3 to a Schedule 2, I thought the world's going to end. I thought I'll be going up to the office on Saturday and Sunday, getting all these people pain scripts for opioids, and it just went like crickets. I mean, you know how it was. No one came to the office anymore asking for drugs because they needed the national campaign about how they were cutting back got through. And it was a good thing. I mean, it really was. It's something that helped me clinically, I can't think of the last time I've written a prescription for opioid. It's been years. Because most of our dental pain, is between mild, early, moderate, early, severe. And acetaminophen and ibuprofen work quite well in most of the cases. But anyway, this is where most of the concentrated area of the number of deaths. I think West Virginia still leads it now. It's up around 60 or 80 per 100,000. It's just going out of sight. This is what we're talking about, of course, this much fentanyl. During the pandemic, it was found to be the #1 cause of death between ages 18 and 45. In fact, we had over 80,000 overdose deaths, or about 80,000, during the pandemic from fentanyl. This has become such a political issue, not only in the state capitals, but in Washington, that some organizations, there's one called Families Against fentanyl, FAF. They're wanting real-time data to be released because they're finding that, if a loved one dies, they have to wait sometimes 6, 12, 18 months to really find the cause of death. And there are different trends of how people use certain drugs. So they're wanting more real-time data so that they can stop, say maybe there's speedballing here, or goofballing there, or using crocodile here, all these different drugs. They're wanting to find out what caused the cause of death so that they actually address it. In fact, one organization, I can't think of the name of it, they're wanting President Biden to call this a WMD, a weapon of mass destruction, because it's what it's done. And so, I mean, obviously, everyone in this room could stand up and do this lecture, because if you just turn on the TV and watch TV for an hour of news, you hear all this. It's all over the place. So I don't know if that's going to change things, but certainly it's a step in the right direction. The latest data that we have in February of 2022, fentanyl kills one person in America every 8.57 minutes, about every 9 minutes. And that's 175 people a day. That's in 2022. Now, if you go back to 2016, that number was 136 people a day. So you see, there's still more and more people dying. And I like to show this when this came from NPR. For the first time in a period from April 21 going back 12 months, we had over 100,000 doses, 100,000 deaths of fentanyl, or opioid deaths, I should say. 100,000 total deaths of all drug overdoses, but about 3/4 of those were from fentanyl and other opioids. Here they are. Meth has made a huge comeback. Some states, actually, during the pandemic, meth really started taking off in several states, South Carolina, Louisiana in particular. But COVID obviously was not a friend to the opioid epidemic. And this came from Border Patrol. There was enough fentanyl confiscated at the Mexican border between January and October of 2021 to kill every American. That's not what was walked in, driven in, tunneled in, flown in, shipped in, drove in, catapulted over the wall. This is just what they've got. So it's everywhere. You've heard about the Mexican cartels, the Sinaloa cartels, with the machetes and stuff. We had in Shelby a couple weeks ago, one of the people in our church got a bang on the door at his house about 2:30 in the morning. He got up and was looking out the window and saw this guy sitting out there with a machete. And it turned out he was from the cartel. And I think most of us want to think the cartels really aren't here. It's just something they talk about on the news. They're only in the big cities. It's in Shelby. It's in Hopeville. It's in Lawndale. These little cities. It's everywhere. You can get anything you want. So it's very available if you want it. This is what we're talking about, these fentanyl pills. This is how they're transported a lot of times. This is what you hear people, they take these, crush them up, snort them, smoke them, inject them, whatever. But I think it was 107,900, about 108,000 deaths in February 2022 going back a year. We had, about 70% of those involved fentanyl or synthetics. But this is the really scary part. This is why when kids get it, it's like a one-kill pill, they call it, a one-pill kill. One-time use sometimes can kill immediately. And I just had a good friend of mine who's a dentist, worked 2 blocks down the road from me. His son just overdosed last weekend. And when they found him, he was snorting. He still had the straw in his nose. And he said he died instantly. So, but they had to wait 6 months to get the official report. So, but they've been doing fentanyl. But 4 out of 10 of these pills, the DEA has just done some studies on or looked at. They have potentially lethal doses. So, and the big thing now, and you'll see here in a minute, is smoking weed that's sprayed with fentanyl. We had 4 people in Cleveland County, Shelby, where I live, back over Labor Day of 2021 that died at a party. They were just smoking a joint, killed over and died. So again, about 330, 40 million Americans. There was enough stuff seized at the border just right there. In this period of 20-year period, we've seen about a 600% increase in the deaths from 1999 to 2020. Of course, it's gone up even further now. There was a little dip in total deaths in that area there. And some people thought it was due maybe to the decrease in prescription writing and also due to the standing order for Narcan that was available for communities. But it turned out, I think the opioids kind of wavered around the same number and then it kind of kept going on that. But these are total deaths. Again, the other drugs that are associated a lot of times with deaths, as you know, probably meth, cocaine, some of the other synthetics. There's one in North Carolina that shows up occasionally called isotonitazine, and I'll talk about that here in just a minute. But there's others, some new ones that are making their rounds now, so we'll talk about that. Unintentional overdose death rates, and studies are showing like 92 to 97%, depending on who you talk to, of people who overdose. It was an unintentional death. I mean, they didn't go out saying, I'm going to kill myself, I'm just going to shoot up. Some do that, but most of them are unintentional deaths. And we know that unintentional deaths are the highest amongst males of white and American Indian and the age group between 25 and 54. These are numbers from the North Carolina DHHS office. Is that wrong? DHHS. And so this is what we're seeing in North Carolina. Now, I thought somebody said something, I'm sorry. Earlier in the talk, I was talking about dentists and what we can do and how we can help and what part that we really play. And this is where I think we're still dealing with it. These are our adolescents. And you know, there's a lot of things going on during that age period. Dr. Landry at Columbia, you know, he talks about the closing. A lot of people talk about how the prefrontal cortex is not completely closed until about the mid-20s, early 20s. The adolescents can become addicted 5 times faster than adults if they're using substances during this time. And also that 96% of people with addiction start some substance before age 21, which is not, you know, not rocket science to understand that. But the point is, earlier they start using drugs as teenagers, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, marijuana, those are the 3 you will see, some LSD, and then Lord forbid, fentanyl. This is usually how they get started. And then dentists, there was a study in JAMA back in 2011. This is the one I always show dentists. The risk of first exposure became a big legal thing, and I guess it still is out in California, where they were going back and trying to sue dentists for people who ended up in treatment in their 30s and 40s because they said that the dentist gave them opioids after a third molar extraction, and they started this cycle of addiction, and they shouldn't have done that because now we know acetaminophen and ibuprofen probably could have and should have been given. But we know that dentists are responsible for about 31% of the first exposure. So orthopedic surgeons, internists, they all prescribe opioids, as you guys know. But we give about a third of all the opioids. So this is where I focus with dentists. I say, I mean, you've got to look at yourself right here and then take a step to this side and say, what would it look like if I first thought of acetaminophen and ibuprofen for everything I did? Not that you can't prescribe it, but that's where that paradigm shift, or whatever the term is now, can be used. I've had oral surgeons tell me, I thought what you were saying was crazy. I had one in Greensboro. He's an MD and DDS. He said, I was going to take you up on what you said. This is 4 years ago. He said, I was writing 5 to 8 opioids a day after surgeries in my office. I decided I would just start with acetaminophen and ibuprofen. Had an endodontist in Winston-Salem said he's written opioids that many times in 7 years. The oral surgeon, getting back to him, he said, I took you up on your offer. And he said, after 6 months, I wrote 2 opioids. He said, I did not know that this stuff would really work. And I said, you know what really worked was the fact that you knew what to expect and that you were going to call them the day after to see how they were doing. Not your assistant, but you were going to call. People want to know that, you know, we got their back. And I think that's part of the relationship thing that dentists are not very good at. Yes?
And this is a comment just to go on the terrible 31% number. What's going on in our high schools is absolutely horrible. I think that number was probably because the teenagers were messing up on what's happening. But I spoke to a young girl who was brought into the office yesterday because her mom was very concerned because of 15 going on 16. She's been using marijuana regularly. And the mom was very upset because her darling little girl was a regular user. Mom and the daughter was trying to decrease her use, and she's trying to get on the right course. So I said, honey, how does a 15-year-old get a hold of marijuana regularly? Are you going out? Are you going to parties? She said, doctor, all I have to do is walk up and down the schools. You have people offer you, what is it that you want today? I mean, they come out of the hallways, they come out of everywhere. And there are people that I know, and they get their amount. This is at Graham High School. In our high school down in Hampton, not a huge bedrock of drug addiction. So our kids are being targeted by somebody else. So I just wanted to make that comment that even the 31% of the children are not saying what's actually going on. They've been exposed long before. You can get anything, including, like you said, fentanyl-laced marijuana,
Right.
if you just ask for it.
I'm just going to build on what Rose said. I spent 2 hours with leaders at a local Cary High School trying to talk about the dangers of marijuana. They're not convinced by that, and they basically, all these leaders divulged that at least at a minimum, 1 in 5, every one of their classmates is using marijuana. Striking. I was blown away. Sorry.
No, it's, I mean, this is, I don't know. I know they did I'm just sitting here thinking about that. There was a study or survey by the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, the middle school out there, and they asked the students, second-year students, their impression of the severity or how serious it was or dangerous it was to smoke tobacco and also to smoke marijuana. And tobacco was in the low 90s, and marijuana was like 25%. You see what I'm saying? It's hard to convince people. The average joint today can be up to 15 times what it was back in the 70s. I mean, and you're looking at 0.5 to 4% THC back in the 70s, now you're looking at 18 to 25%, then you got vaping up to 99% THC. It's a brave new world. I mean, it's a different world. But this is along to your point about, as you know, drug dealers don't necessarily stand on the corners anymore. They have a way of marketing in schools, like you mentioned, but they also have ways of using social media. And Snapchat, TikTok, I can't say these words, Snapchat, TikTok, and Instagram, three on the left here, are the ones that they commonly use to promote sales to middle schoolers. This is where it starts. And this is the DEA emoji drug code. So they watch a TikTok video, or and you get this online, there's multiple ones here. You may see here, I don't know if this is going to work, let's see. Yeah, like oxycodone's here. They've got all these symbols. So they may have a little video of someone dancing or whatever, and they're saying, we've got oxycodone, if that symbol comes up, and Adderall, and you can come over here and, I mean, you see what I'm saying? These things pop up, and the kids know what that means. I mean, you remember when you first got your first video game, and your son or daughter was sitting there going, up, snap, snap, hey, baby, and you're going, well, how do you know how to do that? When you're playing a video game. And they say, you just know. They know what this means. And this is one way they communicate to our middle schoolers. And it's obviously a huge problem. I talk on this for about an hour, this whole topic right here, but I'll get off this and go on to another topic. But this is the conclusion of this section about adolescence. This is from the addiction professionals in North Carolina, and I always read this, and I put it on my exam that I have to give when I do my Zoom courses online. I say, as individuals continue to mature between the ages of 13 and 21, the likelihood of lifetime substance misuse drops 4 to 5% for each year that the initiation of a substance is delayed. So in a perfect world, if your child does not smoke, use tobacco, marijuana, or alcohol until age 25, I mean, obviously you can still develop an addiction, but after that prefrontal cortex and executive functioning, I mean, young kids don't make good decisions to begin with, but when you grow drugs, it's really messy and they're delayed in their maturation. So it's just something that we need to think about as a goal. Obviously, that's very difficult to do in these days, but this is a true event that happens in the life of a child. This is why I think we're seeing a lot of people that grow up with issues and have to deal with,
Have there been any studies of actual brain damage? I know there have been genetic studies with marijuana, but there have been, it's hard to control for, but, siblings or identical twins or something that the brain is subject to injuries and, they get bad pathways and they can never think straight.
structurally, chemically, all
Yeah,
those ways.
Yeah, I mean, there are nuclear medicine scans that you can do. I mean, for all different addictions, whether it's cocaine or even pornography, all those things will show significant differences in somebody who's addicted or who's been using it. And it shows that when you're into that addiction, the blood flow to the prefrontal cortex drops. So you're losing your ability to make rational, difficult decisions.
Right. I heard back in January, I heard an expert speak on internet, pornography, gaming, and gaming addiction. Excellent lectures from Kentucky, and just outstanding presentation about brain studies, phones and how we use them and how kids use them. It's just a scary time. Other synthetics, you heard me mention isotoniazine. This appeared during COVID, and in fact, at first it wasn't scheduled. It's a non-fentanyl-based drug, but it's more powerful in its effects. In fact, we started seeing about 40 to 50 deaths during COVID. In July of 2020, the CSA decided to temporarily schedule this now as a scheduled kind of drug. They call these counterfeit dialogue, they got different names, all these names they use, but this powder here is pressed in the pills and sold, and then the zombie drugs. Are you familiar with the new zombie drugs? Well, there's two zombie drugs you need to know about, and this is real. Anyone know the Kensington area of Philadelphia? Anybody ever feel like
Kensington, yeah.
Kensington, yeah. That's where the highest number of people are dying right now. I think it's over 100 or 100,000. It's just unbelievable. Some of these pictures come from there. Xylazine is a drug that's been around for like 100 years, 50 or 100 years. But they're using this, and they call it Tranq, T-R-A-N-Q, Tranq, or however you say it. They mix it, cut it with fentanyl. It's a drug that veterinarians have used for like horses and animals and stuff for sedation. It does cause all these heart and lung issues. It's not a scheduled drug, but people are having to get amputations due to necrosis and decreased blood flow in areas, and they walk around like this guy up here at the top. It's just they're like zombies, and it really looks like The Walking Dead. The other drug that's out there is called desmorphine. It's been around for a while. These are not tattoos. This is actually necrotic flesh in the leg. You see there, this drug is called crocodile. Its name, it's Russian for crocodile. It's an opioid that comes on real quick, it goes away real quick. And they started, as it says there, they make it from codeine, basic chemistry. You can make it at home. I don't know how you make it. But the impurities, when they miss the vein, they go into the soft tissue, they cause immediate necrosis, and this is what you see. And if you ever just want to see something about these two drugs, just go to YouTube and watch it out. It's amazing what it's doing. In North Carolina, in 2000 and 2021, we've had 32,000 total drug overdoses, with about 24,000 being opioids. Typically, this was a stat that came from 2019, 10 counties where you see total versus just opioid. Typically, Mecklenburg and Wake kind of flip-flop from 1 and 2, and then Guilford and Forsyth 3 and 4. Yes?
If that's correct, then that's a third of the U.S. deaths come from North Carolina. 32,000 total drug overdose.
That's over a 21-year period.
Oh,
21-year period.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, 21
I thought-
yeah. We're not quite there yet, but I will talk about that here in just a minute. In fact, about 75 to 80% have some kind of base in it. But here's North Carolina's report. Our numbers are up 40% in 2020 over 2019, and we have 9 per day from total. 9 people died, total deaths 9. So you take about 70 to 80% of that, and that's what the opioids statistically would be. Drug overdoses, if you look at the last 3 years, this is what we've had. And you see we've gone from 2,300 in 2019 up to 4,000 in 2021. These are total deaths in opioids, yes.
When I was in high school, they had so many deaths from alcohol and people in car accidents. And, they made a big deal about showing movies from the Ohio State Police about, kids getting killed in car accidents. And the movies were horrible.
Yeah.
And had all these.
I remember.
And people remember them, the kids remember them, but they showed them in driver's ed classes, they showed them, why don't we make movies and have kids, OD'd on the streets and the high school player and seizing and, make horror shows out of it because it's horrible. And show it, in high schools. It should make mandatory that everybody has to see it in high school.
No, I was just going to agree with you completely. The young lady had asked me earlier about what kind of regulations can you do, what are there laws that you can put in place, and I was just thinking, that would be the rule for an American society. We change based upon information. That's why we decrease in smoking, based upon information. And so, I think that change, I saw these movies of what happens to an addicted person, when I was like 10, 11, 12, and I was afraid. and it doesn't work for everyone, but for a lot of people, I think, especially when you're talking about this, the small amount of fentanyl. I know about it, I didn't know it was quite that small of an amount can kill you. That is just so dangerous, and I'm sure, I know through my patients, they have no idea. And how can a 13-year-old, 14, 15-year-old really know? I think if you had them take a test, and I think, to really show that they've been educated about the risks that are out there that's going to meet them. We've tried to stop it at the border for I don't know how many years, and for some reason we can't do that. But we can certainly try to protect them with knowledge.
Well, and you've seen the ones on tobacco, the lady that has the laryngectomy and she's lost her right jaw and everything. Just watching her talk, that, if I was a kid, that would do it for me, I'm sorry. And that's another thing, people that say, kids don't really believe all that. They do. They're impacted by what they see. And they will remember that image. We've had about 15,000 overdose visits, not necessarily to die, 15,000 in North Carolina in 2020, and there's suggested evidence that not rocket science, but during the 2021, the numbers are increasing in North Carolina. We do have the North Carolina Opioid Action Plan, which you're probably familiar with. We have the same in dentistry. It's pretty much the same, but it talks, the key tripod, if you will, is prevention.
Can I make it? Can I make a request? I go to medical lectures, I'm retired, but I go to medical lectures, and the government publishes these things. State governments, federal governments, and people print them and they put a slide up, and I can't read anything on that slide. I learn by visually memorizing facts.
Yeah.
And they have these things like, they look like work things and you see behind the refrigerator, things you're supposed to, OSHA. Right. How you're supposed to dispose of needles, and it goes on fine print for 4 pages. And you can't learn from a slide like that.
Yeah, I was going to try to. I have the denim one in here. That's a little bit easier to read if I can find it here.
It's like taking pictures of a textbook.
Here it is. There's the denim. This is a little bit better than you'll see. I'll jump in here. Okay, so it just says that the dental and the lines up with the medical or the overall plan. These are the 6 parts. I kind of put it out here. use a coordinated infrastructure where people talk, about what's going on, reduce the oversupply of prescription opioids, reduce the diversion of prescription drugs and flow of illicits, increase community awareness, expand treatment, and then reassess as needed. So that's a little bit easier to read, but it's basically what that other one does. But I get what you're saying. These flow sheets, you can't even read them. You have to have a magnifier just to see
You
it.
can't read them when they're on the wall behind the refrigerator.
Yeah. Right. And the last thing here, and this is about that 4,000 deaths. This is the trajectory of the total number of deaths. And so in North Carolina, in 2021, they estimated it would be 38.5 per 100,000 residents. And interesting, right in this 2018 area is where, let's see, right here where the green line is when this opioid action plan was launched. And you saw for the next year or two, it kind of went down a little bit, leveled off, and then COVID hit, it went back up. In 2015, it was estimated that medical, legal, loss of jobs, mental health, treatment, all the aspects that addiction affects or death affects society. North Carolina spent $1.2 billion. That was the cost, rather, what it cost the state. By 2019, that doubled to $2.4 billion. And these numbers are probably low, to be honest. And again, I just showed you this. I'm going to run through this real quick here. We'll go on here. Okay, so what do we do to mitigate this? Well, obviously, the three-pronged approach that most organizations take: prevention, medicated assisted treatment, which I'm not going to talk about, but you guys are familiar with Suboxone, methadone, and naltrexone. And then the last one, naloxone. I bring this to your attention because in this 3-year period between 2016 and 19, we know that fentanyl strength is increasing. Polypharmacy is in effect here, but in 2016, 58% of people who got one bolus of Narcan reversed from the overdose versus in 2019 it was about 24%, mainly due to fentanyl strength and also polypharmacy and, like I say, multiple drugs found in autopsy reports.
Is the Narcan given? I just have never done it. But is the Narcan? Well, here it is, a spray. But do they have a Narcan? Is it given IM or is it given
If you give it IM.
Yeah, you give it. Well, you give it. If you get a vein, like EMTs can do it, they titrate it, but you have to be careful because you give them too much and it'll come out kind of violently swinging, if you will, when they come out of the overdose. But you can give it, like you said. I just wanted to make you aware there's a new dosage the FDA approved in 2019. It's called Caloxidone. It's basically 8 milligrams instead of the 2 to 4 that Narcan. So they think due to the higher problems with opioid, the strength, that you needed a stronger, more effective Narcan, because they were losing people. People were dying. You couldn't get them reversed. I talked to a firefighter in Charlotte. He said that he gave like 4 or 5 boluses to a guy. The guy never came back. This was like, years ago. He said they need something stronger, so they just decided to double it. This is called Caloxidone. But it's typically...
Is that just the same stuff on the strong?
Exactly the same thing. It's 8 milligrams versus the 2.
But Narcan doesn't last for very long.
No.
And so you've got to get that person to the ER.
Yeah, you do it sequentially every couple of minutes, they say. But the sprays, what you see people use on the street. And these little sprays, when they first came out in California, you have to when you write an opioid, you have to co-prescribe Narcan. So can you imagine getting 4 tablets of hydrocodone after a procedure for $4 and buying 2 of these sprays, because they come in 2 in a pack, for $250. That's what they were doing. So you might not want to take the surgery. Yeah. North Carolina, you don't have to do that. They can give it to you or talk to you about it. Okay, so I'm going to really kind of go through this real quick. 90% of the opioids, law enforcement carry some form of Narcan with them. Overdose deaths, we mentioned psychostimulants. We have seen an increase, as you see, of opioids being mixed with stimulants. And if you look at those 3 circled, the heroin, the cocaine, and the psychostimulants, they're all on the rise. The other drugs are on the way down. So we know that's happening. You heard me talk about speedballing with fentanyl with cocaine, or youthballing fentanyl with methamphetamines. Some people think this may be the sort of the part of the next wave. And then I've already mentioned about marijuana being sprayed with fentanyl. And then polypharmacy, this is not rocket science either, but NIH reported that you have an 8 to 10 times greater risk of overdose or death if you're combining opioids with benzos due to the combined effect of the respiratory and heart issues. Now, topics in the last 6 minutes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to miss my stuff, but this is about marijuana. Fox News, WGHP, and I guess that's High Point, Greensboro, asked North Carolinians recently, should we legalize for medical purposes marijuana? 72% for medical said yes, so about 3/4 of North Carolinians in 2020 said we need to legalize it. As far as recreational, it's about a half. So with that being said, just want you to know recreational, the 22 states have now recreational use. There were 5 states in the midterms just a few months ago. Minnesota and Missouri actually checked the box, so they went to the 21st and 22nd state. South Dakota, North Dakota, and Arkansas declined. These are states that are probably going to legalize or move on marijuana legalization this year. North Carolina is a state that is one to watch because they think it will go also legalize medicinal or medical and recreational. I think federally it's going to be recreationally. Federally, all states will be legalized use for recreational use. In fact, Congress has several bills. I think Biden's ready to sign some of them, but I don't know. They say it kind of had a lot of impetus going, a lot of momentum going into late 2021 and then early 2022. Now it's kind of died off. I guess the war in Ukraine and other issues are going on that's kind of put it on the side. But this right here to me is what we've been talking about. Look at the age group here. Look at this. It just goes up since about 2009 with the trend of young Americans using marijuana. And so it's scary, especially with being laced with fentanyl potentially. Why is it scary in a medical or dental office? Because cannabis inherently has the potential to have cardiovascular effects. We've had an oral surgeon and a GP who called me and said that patients were like going in attack and all this kind of stuff. And it turned out to be, marijuana. In fact, the article, Corey, that you sent me, thank you, yesterday, I'd seen that before, but thank you for that. One of the studies shows that if you smoke routinely THC or use THC routinely, that you have a higher tendency of having a myocardial infarction in the first hour of use. So in my day, if I had an anxious patient that was going to come see me, I would give them maybe 5 milligrams of Valium the night before, and then 5 that morning before they came to see me. Now, who knows? I mean, we're sitting out in the parking lot, smoking, vaping in particular, and come into your office, and we've had episodes reported in North Carolina in dentistry with cardiovascular issues. This is just one of the plethora of articles that you can find about the inherent nature of the sympathetic response that cannabis can have on the heart. And so you see this tack. It's not like an epi rush that you get like when you get your jaw numb and you feel your heart racing for a few minutes and then it goes away. This can go on for 2 to 3 hours with PVCs and other arrhythmias, and it's commonly seen more in people who are chronic users, those who have high concentrations of THC, and also have a genetic vulnerability to addiction. So it's kind of scary that the Senate Bill 711, I think that's a funny name, it's like 711, the North Carolina Compassionate Care Act is all about medical cannabis. It's probably going to be passed. I know it went through the Senate and then the House kind of poo-pooed it for a while, but I think it's going to be brought up again in the next session. But it's about, providing the sale of cannabis for those who qualify for medical debilitating medical issues.
Is it going to be done by physicians or is it?
Physicians, yes. Yeah. That's my understanding. Yeah. Dr. Sela, I don't know him, Naveed, I've never met him, but he's a medical journalist. I don't know how many medical journalists y'all know, but this is the first one that I've ever heard of. But he made a statement in a journal, and I want to read it to you. I think it's appropriate. It really says where I think we are in the profession. He says, my medical opinion about cannabis is that it is reality that we have to deal with. I am neither pro nor con, but I am frustrated, as everyone in healthcare should be, that a substance has been legalized for general consumption with almost no meaningful evaluation of its true medical effects, drug interactions, etc. Note that the National Academy of Science says this was 3 conditions that really have any kind of sufficient or definite use of medical marijuana. One is spasticity with MS, one is for pain, chronic pain, and one is for, in low doses, nausea and vomiting from chemotherapy. In high doses, in chronic use, you can develop a condition, as some of you know, called cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. And so, but anyway, I love this. And then he goes on, he says, the substance was demonized and therefore could not be studied. You know, reefer madness, Vietnam War, all through history. And then it was legalized without appropriate research. So I know today we seem to be a society when someone makes a suggestion. So everybody raise your hand. If you, all the hands go up, you have a majority are going to do it. And so I'm not saying that THC, CBD, that they don't have a place in medicine, but it's a purity issue right now in the research. I just don't want to get the cart before the horse. So I think if we could just continue to develop good peer-reviewed double-blind studies about this, that it will have a place. Canada and some of the European countries are actually mixing CBD, which, it sounds real innocuous. It's not a habit forming. I mean, it's not psychostimulant, but some of the CBD you can buy over the counter actually has no CBD in it, or very low amount of CBD. It has also been found to be tainted with fentanyl. Even bottles that have been unopened. I know the director of medical toxicologist for South Carolina, she told me that when they go into crime scenes, they analyze the stuff and says they open up bottles that says 100% pure CBD. It's never been opened. They open it up and test it. It may have, stimulants in it. It's just crazy. You don't know what you're buying because it's not regulated. So my closing thoughts, I got 9 seconds. The human being, and I truly believe this is sort of, is this thing on a bus or goes to 0?
Pause before you.
Okay. It's just, I see this going down, it's 5 seconds. Okay. So the human being, I believe, and as most of us in this room probably believe, that, we're born into sin, we're born into a fallen world. And we all have a hole in our heart. And we're looking for something to fill that. And as you know, some fill it with love, some fill it with Christ, some fill it with drugs, some fill it with whatever. And I like, this is one of my favorite, we all know John 3:16, but this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible because I think it really speaks to what's going on now. And that's a few verses down, John 3:19. And it says, and this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. Now, I'm not saying everybody who gets into drugs are evil. I'm not trying to make that an equation, but I'm just saying that sometimes this is how we end up where we are. And so correcting, and I truly believe this, and I get in arguments all the time with people, but correcting drug use misuse in America is not the result of a society that lacks the finances to address this issue. It's not a financial problem. We got plenty of money. We got plenty of smart people. We got plenty of whatever we need. It's not a money problem. The current use misuse of drugs in America reflects a nation that has a deprived spiritual condition, which is a result of a fallen world that has turned its back on Jesus Christ. I love this verse. We all know it. God says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. That's 2 Chronicles 7:14. And Jeremiah reminds us, he says, return to me, declares the Lord God Almighty. I will return to you, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. So, this is the problem, or a potential problem. I think in this society, whatever we're going to call it, where we are in 2023, this is a phrase I use a lot, and I think due to our disobedience and our disbelief, we've created a God of our own understanding. We're the center of God. God doesn't come this way, we go that way. And I think what's happening is that we're in a situation where we're redefining what we've known traditionally in Christianity over years, trying to find a new way, a better way. And so it's scary when we don't know. And Pilate didn't know. This is a famous painting by Antonio Cicero back in the 1800s. This is Ecce Homo. And it says, behold the man. He's turned into Jesus. And I think sometimes if we turn to the true Christ in the Bible, that's the starting place for true answers. I don't think that the answers are found in anybody but Him. And so in our field, in dentistry and substance abuse and everything, I think most people want to think their way through it because we're brilliant people. I mean, we're mostly smart people. So we want to focus our results on the mental and the physical and hope that down the road the spiritual follows. We become more spiritual. And that's not the way it works in my view. The way it works is that it starts with the spiritual, and that's where you humble yourself and ask Christ into your life. And then the changes will occur. Your mental and physical outpouring will change. And so John 10:10 says, the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and to destroy. I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly. So my hope is that we can find a society that will take that cross and put it back in the center of that and trust in the Lord in everything we do. So thank you, and hopefully we can all. Well, it says I was 17 seconds over, but it was more like 5 minutes.
That's called grace.
Grace.
So y'all have about a 10-minute break. Please feel free. Restrooms, there's food, coffee out there. Greet someone you haven't greeted yet, and then we'll call you back in about 10 minutes.
Scary. Possible lists. So are you going to see